Dr. Ino Moro had always hated funerals, and conducting 170,000 leagues under the sea was no exception. "I mean, honestly," he muttered, adjusting the collar of his pressure suit, "what's the point of a burial at sea when you're already under it?" His voice echoed through the cramped observation dome of the research station, bouncing off the walls like a bad karaoke performance. The other members of the crew stood silently around the makeshift pyre, which was really just the incinerator repurposed for the occasion. "To Dave," Ino announced, with as much solemnity as he could muster. Standing there in his wrinkled official jumpsuit, he looked more like a disgruntled janitor than the commander of an undersea research team. He might have been a pain in the ass, but damn it, he was our pain in the ass. The crew chuckled. A ragtag assembly of scientists and misfits who'd ended up at the ass end of the solar system because, frankly, they didn't fit anywhere else. Next to him, Dr. Lena Voss was the only one who looked genuinely sad. "He really was a pioneer," she said, voice thick with emotion, "the first to discover that sleep deprivation and caffeine abuse could be considered a new art form. And he'll be remembered for that," Ino replied, nodding sagely. "Now let's turn him into space ash and get back to not getting eaten by alien fish, shall we?" As the incinerator hummed to life, turning Dave's mortal coil into so much cosmic dust, Ino felt a nudge on his arm. It was Frank, the dome's communications officer, looking like he'd just seen a ghost, or worse, a spreadsheet. "Ino," he whispered, "we've got a problem in the dreamscape." "Of course we do," Ino sighed, rolling his eyes, "because nothing says peaceful funeral like a system failure." He gestured for Frank to lead the way, and they left the rest of the crew to contemplate the transience of life over the muffled whirring of the furnace. The Dreamscape communication system was the latest in interstellar tech, designed to send messages, images, and, in rare cases, dreams across the vast expanse of space. In theory, it allowed the team to stay connected with Earth, even if it was more like a Tesla coil trying to power a toaster. "What's going on?" Ino asked as they entered the cramped control room, which resembled a 1980s vision of a futuristic nightmare, blinking lights and tangled wires everywhere, with a faint smell of burnt toast for good measure. Frank pointed to the monitor, his face a mix of curiosity and concern. "We're receiving some kind of signal, but it's odd. Almost like it's trying to talk to us. If it's calling about Dave's extended warranty, I'm not interested," Ino deadpanned, peering at the display. The screen flickered with strange patterns, like a digital Rorschach test designed by a 5-year-old on a sugar high. "It's not from Earth," Frank said, ignoring the sarcasm, "and it doesn't match any known frequency." "It's alien, Ino." Ino felt a shiver run down his spine. Alien communication wasn't supposed to be part of the package when he signed up for this gig. "Well, that's bloody fantastic," he muttered. "Just what we needed, a cosmic pen pal." "What should we do?" Frank asked, his usual flippancy replaced by genuine uncertainty. "First, we confirm it's not some prank from HQ," Ino replied, rubbing his temples. "Then we try to figure out what the hell it's saying." He turned to leave, then paused and glanced back at Frank. "And maybe, just maybe, we try not to piss it off yet. Last thing I need is an alien invasion because someone mistook a friendly hello for a death threat." Back in the lab, the rest of the team was busy not working, an essential skill for any successful research operation. Lena was poking around the minibar they'd hijacked from the captain's quarters, while Tony, the station's resident engineer, was trying to teach himself how to juggle with a set of spare oxygen canisters. "So what's the verdict, Doc?" Tony called, tossing a canister in the air and narrowly missing his own head. "We've got company," Ino replied, settling into a chair with the grace of a man who'd spent most of his life avoiding exercise. "Alien signals coming through the dreamscape." Tony let the canister drop with a clang. "Aliens, here. I haven't even finished terraforming my cheese sandwich." Lena shook her head, her expression a mix of disbelief and amused resignation. This place just keeps getting better. First the coffee machine breaks, then Dave gets himself barbecued, and now we're playing intergalactic charades. Welcome to Europa, Ino said, spreading his arms in a mock invitation. Come for the microgravity, stay for the existential dread. The crew gathered around the terminal, watching as Frank tried to decipher the incoming message. The patterns on the screen twisted and changed, a kaleidoscope of confusion that seemed more intent on giving them all migraines than answers. Any luck? Ino asked, though he knew the answer before he spoke. It's like trying to translate a dog's dream, Frank said, exasperation evident in his voice. If it's saying take us to your leader, they're going to be sorely disappointed. Lena chuckled, though the laughter was tinged with nervousness. So, what's the plan? Do we wait for them to decipher our reply or just send them a playlist of classic Earth hits and hope for the best? I say we start with Bohemian Rhapsody, Tony chimed in, and see if they're fans of Queen. Ino pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling the weight of his responsibilities, and his crew's relentless sarcasm settling on his shoulders. Let's focus on not getting probed, shall we? He said, shooting Tony an amused glare. We'll try to send a basic response, something like, hello, please don't obliterate us. The group set to work, their banter peppered with the occasional grim joke and half-hearted attempts at optimism. As the Iors dragged on, the lines on Ino's face deepened, mirroring the growing tension in the room. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of trial and mostly error, Frank managed to cobble together a rudimentary message. All right, he announced, sounding more surprised than triumphant. Let's see if they have a sense of humor. Ino nodded, giving the go-ahead. As Frank hit send, the team held their collective breath, waiting for the universe to respond. Silence stretched out, a tangible entity in the cramped room, until finally the console beeped in acknowledgement. A reply. Tony leaned forward, his expression a mix of excitement and dread. What does it say? Frank squinted at the screen, then burst out laughing. It says, welcome, Earthlings. Dinner is served. The room erupted into laughter, the kind born from stress and absurdity rather than genuine amusement. For a moment, the weight of the unknown lifted, replaced by the comforting familiarity of shared human folly. But as the laughter subsided, Ino felt a pang of unease. He knew that beneath the jokes, the optimism, and the bravado, there lurked the very real possibility that they were in way over their heads. All right, folks, he said, clapping his hands together to dispel the tension. Let's remember that we're scientists. We're supposed to be the smartest people in the room, so let's act like it. We'll keep monitoring the signals, and if they request anything more specific than dinner, we'll try not to embarrass ourselves. Lena nodded, her earlier melancholy replaced by determination. And if they do have us for dinner, she said with a wink, at least I won't have to worry about fitting into my old Earth clothes. You couldn't help but laugh. It was either that or cry. Because deep down, you all knew that beneath the waves of Europa, in an alien sea filled with creatures that defied understanding, humanity might be on the menu after all. As the team settled into their routine of anticipation and uncertainty, Ino took a moment to reflect on the absurdity of it all. He'd come to Europa expecting mundane research and the occasional squabble over the TV remote. Instead, he found himself at the forefront of interstellar diplomacy, trying to make nice with the universe's worst comedians. But hey, if humanity could survive itself, surely it could survive this cosmic misunderstanding. All it took was a little luck, a lot of sarcasm, and maybe a killer punchline. The crew gathered in the cramped observation dome, a space that smelled faintly of burnt toast and unwashed socks. It was home, sweet home. Ino leaned against the cold metallic wall, surveying his team with the air of a man who'd walked into a circus expecting a funeral. Beside him, Frank was fiddling with the Dreamscape console, an impressive piece of tech that had all the reliability of a politician's promise. So, anyone here speak alien? Frank asked, jabbing at buttons like he was auditioning for an old arcade game. Not unless you count Klingon, Tony chimed in, his engineering expertise somehow not extending to interstellar linguistics. And even then, I only know how to ask for a beer. Well, if they are offering drinks, we're in business, Ino replied, crossing his arms with a lopsided grin. Enter Talia Voss, Lena's twin sister and engineer extraordinaire, though you'd never guess it from the grease-stained jumpsuit. She glanced around the dome, hands on hips. I don't know about you guys, but I didn't sign up for Alien First Contact. I signed up to avoid my mother-in-law. Trust me, Talia, Ino said, giving her a sage nod. If this goes south, your mother-in-law will be the least of your worries. We're talking full-blown existential crisis territory. Great, Talia muttered, turning her attention to the array of tangled wires and blinking lights, as if my existential dread needed a boost. Meanwhile, Pike Rin, the resident xenolinguist with the perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, strolled in like he owned the place. He had the swagger of a man who'd read too many spy novels and believed half of them. Heard you've got a linguistic puzzle on your hands, he drawled, eyes sparkling with mischief. More like a linguistic death trap, Frank quipped, waving at the screen displaying the chaotic alien signal. What do you make of it, Pike? Pike leaned over the console, scratching his chin. Looks like some kind of code. Could be a greeting, a warning, or their version of stand-up comedy. Hard to say. Well, let's hope they're funnier than Dave, Lena added, her usual spark dimmed by recent events but flickering nonetheless. Pike cracked his knuckles, ready to play detective. All right, let's see what we're dealing with. Maybe they're trying to recruit us for an intergalactic improv troupe. Or maybe they're just inviting us over for dinner, Ino said, and the laughter that followed was only slightly forced. As Pike worked his magic, or at least attempted to, the rest of the team fell into a familiar pattern of feigned productivity. Tony poked at a terminal that beeped ominously, Talia pretended to troubleshoot equipment, and Lena seemed lost in thought, her gaze fixed on the distant glow of Europa's icy plains. The silence was broken by Frank's triumphant shout. Got something, he declared, pointing at the screen like a kid showing off a new toy. The signals repeating, same sequence every few minutes. Reassuring, Ino said dryly. It's either a really determined telemarketer or someone who doesn't know when to take a hint. Pike tapped his fingers on the console, eyes narrowed. Could be they're trying to initiate contact. Or maybe they're just trying to sell us space insurance. Do we even have anything left to insure? Talia wondered aloud, glancing around the battered dome. Just our sanity, Lena replied, and the room erupted into laughter again, the kind that comes from shared misery. As the Iors dragged on, the crew settled into a routine of cautious optimism punctuated by dark humor. Ino couldn't help but admire them. They were a ragtag bunch, but they were his ragtag bunch. And in the face of potential annihilation, they'd stuck together like glue, or more accurately, like something that required a solvent to remove. Eventually, Pike leaned back, stretching his arms with a groan. Okay, I think I've got a lead. The signal's not just repeating, it's evolving like it's learning from us. Great, an alien stalker, Tony said, tossing his hands in the air. What's next? E-Stalkers, the horror movie. If we're lucky, it'll be a rom-com, Lena joked, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. All right, team, Ino said, clapping his hands for attention. Let's focus. We need to understand what this thing wants, or we're going to wind up as Europa's new tourist attraction. The crew nodded, determination mingling with dread. They were scientists, explorers, and most importantly, survivors. And if the universe wanted to play games, they'd play along, right up until the point where they flipped the board. Iors passed in a blur of caffeine-fueled analysis and frantic attempts to understand the evolving signal. As the clock ticked on, the team's hope began to waver, replaced by the grim reality of their situation. They were alone in a hostile environment, with only their wits and a malfunctioning dreamscape system to rely on. Then, without warning, the lights flickered, and the room was plunged into darkness. Well, that's ominous, Talia muttered, reaching for a flashlight. Perfect timing, Ino said, rolling his eyes skyward, or ceiling ward in this case. Someone want to check the generator before we really give the aliens something to laugh about. Tony and Talia grabbed their toolkits and headed out, their bickering fading into the distance as they disappeared down the corridor. Meanwhile, we'll keep working on the signal, Pike said, his voice steady despite the creeping tension. It's trying to say something. We just need to figure out what. Let's hope it's not you're doomed, Lena added, trying to keep the mood light. With the lights still out and the shadows closing in, the team huddled around the flickering console, their faces lit by the eerie glow of alien symbols dancing across the screen. It was like sitting around a campfire, except the ghost stories were all too real. The Dreamscape console beeped again and Frank frowned. Ugh, guys, we've got another problem. Fantastic, Ino said, throwing his hands up. What now? Did the toaster catch fire again? No, Frank hesitated, glancing at the others. It's the Dreamscape. Someone's in there and it's not us. What do you mean someone's in there? Pike asked, leaning over Frank's shoulder to peer at the display. I mean someone or something is accessing our dreams, and they're not asking for permission. Well, that's rude, Lena said, her voice shaky but defiant. All right, we need to shut it down, Ino said decisively. Last thing we need is an alien invasion in our sleep. But what if it's trying to communicate? Pike argued, his curiosity piqued despite the danger. This could be our chance to make real contact. Or it could be our chance to end up in an intergalactic horror movie, Talia said, returning just in time to catch the tail end of the conversation. Generators back up, Tony announced, sliding into a chair with a sigh. But if the lights go out again, I'm calling it quits and moving to a nice, safe asteroid. The crew exchanged glances, weighing the risks and rewards. They were scientists, after all, and the lure of discovery was hard to resist, even when it came with a side of existential terror. Finally, Ino sighed, running a hand through his hair. All right, let's see what it wants, but we're doing it safely. No one's plugging themselves into the Dreamscape without backup. The team nodded, a plan forming amidst the chaos. They were going to open the lines of communication, but on their terms. If the universe wanted to talk, it would have to do it the old-fashioned way, preferably with a bit less invading their personal space. As the crew prepared for the next phase of their unintentional diplomatic mission, Pike took a moment to mutter a few words under his breath, a mix of hope and a healthy dose of skepticism. Here's to whoever, or whatever, is out there, he said, touching the console like he was making a toast. May they be more friend than foe, and may they have a sense of humor. Because, quite frankly, we're gonna need it. With that, they returned to their work, united in purpose if not in certainty. And as the signal continued to evolve, the team braced themselves for whatever came next. After all, in the grand cosmic game of charades, the stakes couldn't be higher, and there was no way they were folding without a fight. In the infinite wisdom of the universe, it had decided to dispense with subtlety and go full-on bonkers. As the Dreamscape console fizzled and popped like a cheap firework, Ino Moro could only chalk it up to another Tuesday on the abyssal frontier. All right, team, Ino announced, his voice seasoned with fatigue. We've got some cosmic hooligans poking around in our dreams. I say we return the favor and poke back. Lena Voss, buoyed by Ino's casual defiance, shrugged. What's the worst that can happen? We get a sleepover invitation from E.T. Or they drag us into an intergalactic therapy session, Frank offered, still fiddling with the console as if it held the secrets of the cosmos, or at least a decent Wi-Fi connection. The kind where they bring out the puppets and start asking about our feelings, Pike added with his trademark swagger, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Talia, who had returned with the grace of a grease-stained panther, snorted. If they think I'm sitting in a circle and holding hands, they are in for a surprise. Tony grinned, tapping his toolkit like he was readying for battle. We could always teach them some Klingon. Maybe they'll back off once they realize we're armed with terrible linguistic skills. And so the plans were laid, loose and laden with irony, like a game of interstellar poker played with mismatched cards. They divvied up the tasks. Frank and Pike would keep deciphering the signal. Tony and Talia would babysit the generator to prevent another blackout, and Ino and Lena would set up the dreamscape defenses. As the Iors dragged on, the alien signal continued its symphony of the bizarre. It was like listening to a cosmic DJ with a penchant for remixes and no sense of rhythm. Each new sequence seemed to bore deeper into their systems, a relentless pursuit that was part curiosity, part invasion. Lena, Ino said, adjusting the settings on the Dreamscape console, you ever get the feeling we're living in one of those nightmares where you know you should wake up, but the alarm clock's just out of reach? Lena nodded, her eyes shadowed with worry. More like one of those dreams where you show up to work naked. Except in this case we're exposed and the universe is having a good laugh at our expense. Speak for yourself, Tony called over. I've got my pressure suit ready in case things get too weird. Good to know you've got a bounce plan, Talia retorted. Meanwhile, I'll keep my jumpsuit on, thank you very much. Pike, who had been deep in thought, abruptly looked up. Got a new theory. What if they're trying to communicate through our dreams because they can't figure out our language? Last time I checked, my dreams were more chaos than communication, Frank said. If that's their best shot, we're all doomed. As if on cue, the Dreamscape console pinged, signaling another intrusion. This time, though, it was accompanied by a low rumble that resonated through the dome, like a far-off thunderstorm inching closer. Anyone else hear that? Talia asked, her hand hovering over the tools like a gunslinger at high noon. Great, Ino muttered, pinching the bridge of his nose. Just what we need, a soundtrack. The team's banter was an armor, albeit a flimsy one. Beneath it lay the stark reality. They were in over their heads and the waters were rising. Okay, folks, Ino said, rallying his crew with a nod. Let's keep at it. If they want to play, we'll give them a game to remember. The Iors stretched into an endless string of coffee breaks and crude jokes, the kind that kept spirits from sinking entirely. Each beep of the console was a reminder of their predicament, a cosmic tap on the shoulder that whispered, "Are we having fun yet?" Eventually, fatigue set in, a stowaway aboard their sinking vessel. Ino found himself staring at the flickering lights, his thoughts dancing between dreams and reality. If the aliens wanted to hold a conversation, they were doing it in the most roundabout way possible. "Hey, Ino," Lena whispered, breaking the silence that had settled like dust. "Remember Dave's theory about alien life?" Ino rubbed his eyes. "The one about them being cosmic comedians." "Yeah," Lena said with a small smile. "Maybe he was onto something. Maybe they're just trying to make us laugh." "Well, they've got a sick sense of humor," Ino replied, though his lopsided grin betrayed a hint of hope. But hey, who am I to judge? As the night wore on, the crew took turns stealing precious moments of rest. It was during one of these lulls that Ino experienced the first of many unsettling dreams. He found himself in a vast, alien landscape, where the ground shifted beneath his feet like fluid glass. Above, the sky churned with colors that defied description, a kaleidoscope of madness. In the distance, shadowy figures moved with purpose, their forms indistinct yet undeniably present. "Commander Morrow," a voice echoed deep and resonant like the call of a distant star. "We seek understanding." Ino blinked, trying to focus. "Understanding, huh? You've got a funny way of showing it." The figures stopped, their attention palpable even in their ethereal state. "Communication is difficult. Our methods are imperfect." "Imperfect's an understatement," Ino shot back, his bravado undimmed despite the surreal circumstances. "You've scared the hell out of us." The voice seemed to sigh, a cosmic breath that rippled through the dreamscape. "We did not intend harm. We observe." "Well, you've observed us into a nervous breakdown," Ino said, crossing his arms defiantly. "How about you observe from a distance?" The landscape shivered, a ripple of emotion that Ino couldn't quite place. "We mean no harm, we wish to learn." "Then maybe start with a hello next time," Ino suggested, his sarcasm a shield against the unknown. "It's usually a good place to start." The dream faded, leaving Ino gasping as he awoke in the dimly lit dome, drenched in sweat and clutching the armrests of his chair. Around him, the others stirred, their expressions mirroring his own bewilderment. "Anyone else just have the weirdest dream of their life?" Lena asked, rubbing her temples. "Depends," Tony said cautiously. "Did yours involve aliens trying to chat us up like they were in a speed dating session?" "Something like that," Pike replied, eyes wide. "They're trying to communicate, but it's like they're using a translator app with a broken speaker." "Well, someone needs to tell them their app needs an update," Frank grumbled. The crew exchanged glances, a silent consensus forming amidst the chaos. For all their fear and uncertainty, they were united in resolve. They would face whatever came next together. "All right, team," Ino said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Let's keep at it. If they want to talk, we'll listen, but on our terms. No more midnight invasions." With a renewed sense of purpose, the crew returned to their stations, their minds abuzz with the possibilities. The aliens were trying to communicate, and while their methods left much to be desired, it was a start. As the hours ticked by, the signal continued its relentless march, each new iteration a step forward or perhaps backward. The line between friend and foe blurred, a dance of shadows that defied easy answers. Ino watched his team, his heart swelling with pride despite the looming threat. They were a ragtag bunch, flawed and irreverent, but they were his. And as long as they stuck together, they stood a chance, however slim. The universe had thrown them into a cosmic charade, a game of wits where the stakes were nothing less than their survival. And though the odds were stacked against them, Ino was determined to play it out to the bitter end. In the silence that followed, Ino's thoughts drifted back to the dream, to the unseen voice that had reached out across the void. The words echoed in his mind, a whisper of hope amidst the darkness. "We wish to learn." Perhaps, Ino mused, they weren't so different after all. Perhaps in the grand scheme of things, they were all just searching for a little understanding in an unforgiving universe. With that thought in mind, Ino leaned back in his chair, his eyes on the console as the alien signal continued its enigmatic dance. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and possibility. But in that uncertainty lay the promise of discovery, a chance to reshape their destiny. And if the universe wanted to laugh at their expense, so be it. Ino and his crew would laugh right back, come what may. Frank fiddled with the dreamscape console like it was a temperamental cat, liable to scratch if handled wrong. "Well, this thing's about as useful as a waterlogged toaster," he muttered, slapping its side with feigned optimism. "That's the spirit, Frank," Ino replied, arms crossed, with a lopsided grin that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else, perhaps even a dentist's waiting room. "Just keep slapping until it sings Ave Maria." Lena peered over the top of the console, her expression a mix of determination and dread. "We just needed to connect. If we can talk to them, to really talk, maybe we can sort out this cosmic mess. Or convince them we're not worth the trouble," Tony added, his toolkit rattling like a bag of bones. "I mean, we are a pretty sorry lot." Talia leaned against the wall, her hands smeared with engine grease. "Yeah, like an interstellar version of please take us off your mailing list." Pike shook his head, the swagger momentarily checked by unease. "If they think our attempt at communication is a declaration of war, then we're screwed." "Like really?" Ino glanced around at his crew, then back at the console they were pinning their hopes on. "Well, let's give it a shot. Who knows, maybe they'll appreciate the dramatic irony." With a series of nods, the crew set their ad hoc plan into motion. Frank twiddled knobs and tapped screens while muttering sweet nothings to the console like it was an old lover, coaxing it into operation. The console flickered, then buzzed like a wasp stuck in a jar. It displayed a series of symbols that defied comprehension, but they were the closest thing to a handshake they'd gotten all day. The team gathered around, peering at the glowing screen as if it held the secrets of the universe or a really good punchline. "All right, team," Ino said, his voice imbued with equal parts hope and resignation. "Let's try to reach these cosmic pranksters before they decide to rearrange our atoms. Why do I get the feeling that we're about to make the worst first impression in history? Frank said, fingers dancing over the controls. Because we probably are, Talia replied dryly. But hey, no pressure. The Dreamscape console buzzed again, this time humming with a rhythm that suggested something deeper, a connection forming in the void. Ino leaned in, speaking clearly despite the surreal nature of the task. This is Commander Ino Moro of the research station undersea. We come in peace, as they say. Let's talk. For a moment, there was silence, a tense pause that hung in the air like a bad smell. Then the console crackled to life and a voice, alien yet eerily familiar, echoed through the cramped dome. Peace. Misunderstood. Communication. Difficult. Tell me about it, Pike muttered under his breath, earning a nod of agreement from Tony. Ino pressed on, his words measured. We understand there's been confusion. We only wish to understand each other, not to provoke. The console's reply was a garbled symphony of static and distorted tones, the alien voice struggling to bridge the chasm of misunderstanding. Intentions, unclear. Actions, perceived as threat. Classic misunderstanding, Talia quipped. Like when you wave at someone who's actually waving at the person behind you. Only with more potential for doom. Lena leaned closer, her voice steady. We're trying to find common ground. We can work together on this. The alien response was slow, as if they were parsing through a dictionary with missing pages. Common ground, elusive, efforts, seen as aggression. Frank sighed, a sound that could have shattered glass. Fantastic, we're the interstellar equivalent of a bad first date. Tony shot him a look. At least we showed up dressed. As the conversation stumbled on, Ino could feel the tension mounting, a pressure cooker of uncertainty and fear. They were trying to build a bridge, but it felt more like a tightrope over a pit of lava. Pike, ever the optimist in a pessimist's suit, piped up. What if we show them something? A gesture of goodwill or whatever. Ino nodded, grasping at straws that felt like they might break at any moment. Not a bad idea. Frank, can we send a visual, something non-threatening? Frank's fingers flew over the keys, the console responding with a series of clicks and chirps. Okay, sending a visual. Here's hoping they're not allergic to our brand of hello. The console word transmitting an image from the station. A simple wave, the crew standing together in a moment of unity. It wasn't much, but it was all they had to offer. There was another pause, the console's lights flickering like a disco from hell. Then the alien voice returned, tinged with something that could have been curiosity or perhaps skepticism. Gesture. Received perception. Altering. That sounds promising, Lena said, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Or ominous, Talia countered. Could go either way. Ino held his breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop, or the other tentacle, as it were. The console sparked, the alien voice fading into static before returning with a chilling clarity that sent shivers down his spine. Intent. Misread. Actions. Require response. The words hung in the air, a foreboding sentence that needed no translation. The crew exchanged glances, the weight of impending doom settling on their shoulders like a damp coat. Tony, ever the realist, broke the silence. Well, that didn't sound like an RSVP to our peace party. No, it didn't, Ino said, his mind racing through contingencies as the console continued to blink ominously. Everyone be ready. I think we might have just poked a sleeping dragon, Frank grimaced, his confidence evaporating like morning dew. And the dragon's got a hangover. As if on cue, the dome shuddered, a tremor that rippled through the station with a low, menacing growl. The alien response was not just words, but action, a series of pulses that resonated through the water, making their intentions unmistakably clear. Looks like they've decided to send a message, Talia said, her voice steady despite the chaos. And it's not a postcard. The lights flickered, dimming as the station's power system struggled against the onslaught. Ino could feel the vibrations beneath his feet, the alien presence pressing against their fragile sanctuary like a storm battering a ship at sea. Everyone stay focused, Ino ordered, his voice cutting through the panic like a knife. We've been through worse. Name one time, Pike shot back, his bravado a shield against the fear clawing at his gut. Okay, maybe not worse, Ino conceded, but pretty damn close. The crew sprang into action, each of them moving with a practiced efficiency that belied the terror gnawing at their edges. Talia and Tony dove into the guts of the station, wrestling with the generator as it flickered with false hope. Just keep it online, Ino called to them, his words punctuated by the whine of the Dreamscape console as it continued its dance of discord. Frank and Pike wrestled with the console, trying to maintain their tenuous connection with the alien presence. It was like trying to hold onto a bar of soap in a hot shower, slippery and impossible. Lena stayed by Ino's side, her eyes scanning the console for any sign of a breakthrough or a disaster. We need to calm them down, Ino. Find a way to show we're not the threat they think we are. I know, Ino said, his mind racing through possibilities like a gambler on borrowed time. We just need to figure out how. The alien presence surged again, a tidal wave of sound and fury that battered against the station's defenses. It felt personal, an accusation wrapped in cosmic misunderstanding. Hey, Ino, Tony called from the depths of the station's bowels. If this whole diplomacy thing doesn't work out, I'm thinking of opening a bakery. Nice quiet life, no alien invasions. Sounds like a plan, Ino replied, his voice strained with the weight of the moment. But first, let's make sure we survive to see retirement. The console crackled, the lights flickering as Frank and Pike fought to stabilize the connection. It was a losing battle, like trying to plug a leak with chewing gum. We're losing it, Frank said, his voice tight with frustration. They're ramping up their signals, it's like they're trying to talk over us. Pike shook his head, his expression grim. Or they're just looking to drown us out. Ino clenched his fists, his mind spinning with the futility of their efforts. They had tried to reach out, but instead of understanding, they had ignited a firestorm. All right, everyone, Ino said, his voice carrying the weight of command. We need to hold the line. Keep trying to communicate, but be ready for anything. The crew nodded, their resolve hardening in the face of the unknown. They were a ragtag bunch, mismatched and flawed, but they were united in purpose. And if the universe wanted to throw everything it had at them, then so be it. They would stand together, defiant in the face of adversity, and give as good as they got. As the alien presence bore down upon them, Ino felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. It wasn't resignation, but acceptance, an understanding that in the end, they were all just trying to find their way in the dark. Here we go, Ino murmured to himself, a sardonic smile tugging at his lips. Welcome to the abyss. The station shuddered again, the lights blinking like Morse code as the alien signal surged, and Ino braced himself for whatever came next. Because in the depths of the abyssal frontier, there was no turning back, only forward into the unknown. As the station shuddered with the alien presence's latest love tap, Ino couldn't help but feel that this was the universe's way of saying, "Welcome to the neighborhood," by setting your house on fire. The lights flickered, dimming to a sullen glow that cast long shadows like a noir film where everyone dies at the end. Well, the mood lighting's perfect for a tragic last stand, Frank muttered, his fingers still dancing over the Dreamscape console like a pianist trying to coax a tune from a broken keyboard. Tony, elbow-deep in wires and cursing like a sailor, shot back. At least we'll look good going down. You mean spouting nonsense and covered in our own filth, Talia quipped from her perch, a smudge of grease on her cheek like war paint. Truly, the picture of dignity. Remind me never to hire you as my publicist, Pike said dryly, adjusting his headphones like a DJ with a death wish. As the alien signal continued to batter their systems, Ino felt the icy fingers of desperation clawing at his calm facade. It was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a paper towel. The Dreamscape console was their only hope, and it was as reliable as a politician on a lie detector. Can we at least get a backup plan going? Lena asked, her voice tinged with the kind of optimism that usually preceded a spectacular failure. Backup plan, Ino raised an eyebrow. We barely have a front plan. How about we all hold hands and hope for the best? Tony suggested, emerging from the tangle of wires with a grimy grin. Solidarity and all that. A great strategy if we were facing a kindergarten bake sale, Talia shot back. Not so sure it works against cosmic entities with a grudge. Lena sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of dashed hopes and looming disaster. Well, whatever we do, we need to do it fast. Life supports taking a hit. That little nugget of joy landed like a punch to the gut. Ino glanced around at the team, their faces shadowed and weary. If the situation wasn't so dire, it would almost be funny. Almost. All right, Ino said, his voice firm despite the sinking feeling in his stomach. Let's pull a miracle out of our collective arse, shall we? The team sprang into action, or a reasonable facsimile thereof. Tony and Talia tackled the life support system like it owed them money, while Frank and Pike continued their one-sided conversation with the aliens. Lena stayed by Ino's side, her eyes scanning the console like it might suddenly offer up the answers to life's greatest mysteries, or at least how not to die horribly. Think they can tell we're winging it? She asked, a wry smile on her lips. Only if they're watching, Ino replied, returning her smile with a lopsided grin of his own. And if they are, they're probably laughing their alien asses off. The station groaned around them, a sound that was less mechanical failure and more existential despair. It felt personal, as if the universe had taken a special interest in making their lives hell. Pike, ever the philosopher in the group, muttered, "Funny, isn't it? All this technology and we're still just ants under a magnifying glass. If we're ants, then I want to be a fire ant," Talia said from her crouched position, elbow deep in circuits. "At least they bite back." "Spoken like someone who's never been to a picnic," Tony replied, his hands a blur as he worked to stabilize their failing systems. The alien presence surged again, a crescendo of sound and fury that rattled the station's bones. It was less communication and more cosmic temper tantrum, and Ino knew they were running out of time. "Come on, people," Ino urged, his voice cutting through the chaos like a whip. "We need to show them we're not the enemy here." "Show them what?" Frank asked, exasperation etched into every line of his face. "A PowerPoint presentation on how not to kill us. Maybe just a friendly reminder that we're not the pests they think we are," Ino replied, his mind racing for solutions like a rat on a wheel. As if in response, the Dreamscape console sparked, a shower of electrical fireworks that sent Frank scrambling for the fire extinguisher. "Great, now it's a bonfire," Talia said, her tone dry as dust. "All we need are marshmallows." Ino couldn't help but chuckle, even as the situation spiraled further out of control. It was either laugh or cry, and he'd never been fond of tears. "Okay, new plan," Ino announced, his voice a rallying cry in the darkness. "We keep trying to talk to them, but we prepare for the worst. Talia, Tony, see if you can rig the backup life support." "You want us to MacGyver it?" Tony asked, eyebrows disappearing into his hairline. "Exactly," Ino replied with a nod. "Throw everything at it, duct tape, prayers, and maybe a sacrifice to the gods of technology." "You got it, boss," Talia said, offering a mock salute before diving back into the fray. Lena leaned closer, her voice low. "And if that doesn't work, then we hope they're not the vengeful type," Ino said, his voice grim yet determined. "And that they have a sense of humor." The lights flickered again, a strobe effect that made Ino feel like he was trapped in a nightmare rave. The alien presence wasn't going away, and neither was the dread clawing at his insides. "Is it just me," Pike said, "or does it feel like the universe is sitting back with a bucket of popcorn, enjoying the show?" "Well, at least someone's having a good time," Frank replied, his voice strained as he continued to wrestle with the console. The alien signal pulsed, an unrelenting tide that battered their defenses with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. It was a reminder of their insignificance, a cosmic footnote in the annals of universal history. "Hey, if anyone's got a brilliant idea, now's the time," Ino said, scanning the faces around him for a spark of genius. "How about we ask them to join us for dinner?" Tony suggested, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Nothing like breaking bread to bridge the gap. Only if they bring the wine," Talia added, her voice a strained mix of humor and desperation. Lena shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. "I'm guessing they're more of the divide or everything in sight type." Ino chuckled, a sound that held more than a hint of hysteria. "Well, if they eat us, at least we'll go down in history as the tastiest humans in the abyss." The station trembled again, the walls creaking like an old ship braving a storm. With each pulse from the alien presence, Ino felt the weight of their predicament pressing down on him, a suffocating blanket of inevitability. "Okay, everyone," Ino said, his voice steady even as his heart raced. "Let's keep at it. If we can survive this, we can survive anything." "Survival's overrated," Pike muttered, "but I'd rather find out than not." "Agreed," Ino replied, his gaze sweeping over the team. "Let's give it everything we've got." With renewed determination, the crew continued their frantic efforts to communicate, to repair, to survive. It was a desperate dance on the edge of oblivion, and they were running out of steps. For a moment, Ino allowed himself to imagine a different outcome, a future where they emerged victorious, their names whispered in awe by those who came after. But it was a fleeting dream, quickly snuffed out by the harsh reality of their situation. "Hey, Ino," Tony called out, a rare note of excitement in his voice. "We might have something here." Ino's heart skipped a beat as he moved to join Tony and Talia at the life support panel, hope warring with skepticism. "What have you got?" "Well," Talia said, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, leaving a streak of grease in its wake, "we've managed to reroute some of the power lines. It's not pretty, but it might just keep us breathing for a bit longer. Or it could blow up in our faces," Tony added, ever the pessimist. "But hey, at least it's a plan." Ino nodded, clapping Tony on the shoulder. "I'll take it. Good work." As the team settled back into their respective tasks, Ino felt a flicker of hope, a small, fragile thing, hardly noticeable amidst the chaos. But it was enough to keep him going, to push him forward into the unknown. "All right, everyone," Ino called out, his voice carrying over the din. "Let's show these cosmic pranksters what we're made of, whatever that is." "Determination and bad decisions," Frank suggested, his voice a wry echo of their shared fears. "And a healthy dose of madness," Lena added, her eyes bright with resolve. Ino grinned, a fierce, defiant expression that dared the universe to throw its worst at them. "Sounds about right. Now let's get to it." With renewed energy, the crew continued their fight against the odds, each of them driven by the shared desire to survive, to prove that they were more than just footnotes in an alien history book. And as the alien presence bore down upon them, they stood united, ready to face whatever came next. In the depths of the abyssal frontier, they would not go quietly into the dark, because in the end they were human. Flawed, stubborn, irreverent, and unyielding. And if the universe had a problem with that, then it could take a number and get in line. Ino Moro stood in the cramped observation dome, the faint scent of burnt toast still lingering in the air, mingling with the aroma of unwashed socks. The universe seemed to have conspired against them, a cosmic joke played at their expense. He glanced at the Dreamscape console, now more of a decorative hazard than a functional piece of technology. "This thing's as useful as a chocolate teapot," he muttered, kicking the console lightly. It sparked in response, a shower of blue fireworks that illuminated the gloom. Lena, standing beside him, shook her head. "Maybe it's time we try something different. We can't keep hoping that the universe will suddenly decide to throw us a lifeline." "Different like what?" "A group hug." Ino's voice dripped with sarcasm, though the idea of hugging his grimy crew was only slightly less appealing than embracing the alien menace outside. "No," Lena said, her voice thoughtful. "Like maybe using what we've got, our own culture." Ino raised an eyebrow. "You suggesting we throw them a cultural dance party?" "Because I left my tap shoes back on Earth." Lena chuckled, a sound that was more resigned than amused. No, but there might be something in the way we handle death. Like funeral rites. Ino blinked. Funeral rites? Seriously, Lena, I know we're in deep, but you're really going to suggest we hold a funeral for the aliens. Not a funeral, she clarified. But think about it. Rituals are universal. It might be a way to show them we mean peace, not to mention the one thing we haven't tried, dream patterns through ritual. Great, Pike interrupted, adjusting his headphones. We'll just explain to the cosmic hooligans that we're sorry for the misunderstanding, and here's a touching eulogy for good measure. Ino rubbed his temples, the pressure of leadership and impending doom doing an excellent job of giving him a migraine. Lena, how do you propose we even start something like that? Well, we tap into the dreamscape system, Lena said, gesturing at the console like it owed her a favor. It's busted, but if Frank can rewire it to simulate a dream pattern, we might be able to project a ritualistic sequence. Frank, who had been quietly sulking in the background, perked up at the mention of his name. You want me to MacGyver some ancient Earth ritual into the dreamscape? I got a better chance of teaching a fish to tap dance. Think of it as a challenge, Ino said, the corners of his mouth twitching into a smile. And as long as we're not cooking up a sacrificial lamb, I'm all ears. Fine, Frank grumbled, rolling up his sleeves and approaching the console with the air of a man condemned to a fate worse than death, or at least a particularly tedious conference call. But if this thing explodes, I reserve the right to say I told you so as my last words. Noted, Ino replied, turning to the rest of the team. Talia, Tony, I need you two to keep life support patched together while we figure this out. And Pike, maybe you can prepare a little interpretive dance in case we need a backup plan. Interpretive dance, Pike echoed, mock horror in his voice. I'd rather get eaten by the aliens. Ino grinned, and for a moment the weight of their predicament felt a fraction lighter. Good, because that's Plan C, with a shared sense of purpose, or at least a mutual desire not to die. The crew set to work. Frank began the delicate operation of coaxing the dreamscape console back to life, muttering curses under his breath like incantations. The rest of the team busied themselves with their own tasks, working with the kind of grim determination that came from having no other choice. As Talia and Tony wrestled with the life support system, Ino couldn't help but feel a spark of admiration for their resilience. They were a ragtag group of misfits, barely held together by duct tape and desperation, but at least they were his misfits. So, about these funeral rituals, Ino said, joining Lena as she pored over a tablet filled with ancient Earth customs. What exactly do you have in mind? Well, Lena began, swiping through the data with a focus that belied the chaos around them. Funerals are all about closure, right? Symbols of peace, journeys into the afterlife, that sort of thing. Sounds like a lot of work for something that ultimately ends with throwing dirt over a hole, Ino mused. True, but it might just be symbolic enough to catch the aliens' attention, Lena replied. If we can project a sequence that shows we're not a threat, maybe they'll stop trying to turn us into cosmic roadkill. Sounds like a long shot, Ino admitted. But then again, so was asking Frank to mend a circuit with nothing but a soldering iron and a prayer. And yet here we are, Lena said, offering a quick smile. If we've learned anything down here, it's that long shots are better than no shots. As the Iors dragged on, the crew fell into a rhythm, the station's creaks and groans providing an unsettling backdrop to their efforts. Talia and Tony fought the life support system to a standstill, neither side gaining ground but neither losing it either. Frank, meanwhile, performed a delicate dance with the dreamscape console, his fingers flitting across the keys like a pianist coaxing melody from a broken piano. All right, he said finally, stepping back and wiping sweat from his brow. I think I've got something. Doesn't look like much, Pike commented, peering over Frank's shoulder at the console's flickering display. Yeah, well, neither does a bomb until it goes off, Frank shot back. Ino joined them, studying the console's output with a critical eye. So how does this work exactly? We just flip a switch and hope for the best. more or less, Lena said, tapping a few commands into the tablet. I've input a sequence of ritualistic imagery, peaceful transition, journeys into light, that kind of thing. Frank's jury-rigged it to the dreamscape so it should broadcast our intentions. If we're lucky, Frank added, ever the optimist. Otherwise, we're just sending them an interstellar Rorschach test. Well, no time like the present, Ino said, glancing around at his team. Let's do this. They gathered around the console, a motley assembly of grease-streaked engineers and sleep-deprived scientists, unified by a shared determination to see this through. Ino took a deep breath, then nodded to Frank. All right, hit it. Frank pressed a series of buttons, and the console whirred to life, emitting a low hum that reverberated through the dome. The images Lena had programmed flickered on the screen, abstract patterns and serene vistas, a kaleidoscope of color and movement that pulsed in time with the station's tremors. Looks like a trippy screensaver, Pike muttered, though there was a note of hope in his voice. Let's hope it's enough to catch their attention, Ino replied, his eyes fixed on the console's display. For a moment it felt as if the universe itself held its breath, the station's usual groans and creaks falling silent. The alien presence which had pressed so heavily upon them seemed to recede, its intensity dimming to a distant murmur. Is it working? Lena asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Ino shrugged, the gesture a combination of hope and helplessness. Hell if I know. But something's changed. The crew waited, each second stretching into eternity, the air thick with unspoken fears and fragile hopes. Ino felt his heart pounding in his chest, a relentless drumbeat of anticipation. Then slowly, the station's lights began to stabilize, the flickering chaos giving way to a steady glow. The deep, bone-rattling vibrations eased, replaced by a gentle hum that was almost soothing in comparison. Well, Pike said, breaking the silence with a wry smile. Either we've made peace, or they are lulling us into a false sense of security before they eat us. I'll take it, Ino replied, relief flooding through him in a wave. But let's not break out the champagne just yet. We're not out of the woods. Frank, ever the skeptic, tapped a few more buttons on the console. Looks like the dreamscape is holding steady. The broadcast is still going out. Which means either it's working, or we're accidentally teaching them how to perform an Irish wake, Tony said, his grimy grin making a reappearance. Irish wake sounds about right, Talia replied, her fingers still deep in the guts of the life support system. A funeral and a party all in one. Let's hope it's the former, Lena said, though there was a hint of laughter in her voice. We might be onto something here, guys. Ino allowed himself a cautious smile, the first genuine one he'd managed in what felt like an eternity. Looks like we've bought ourselves some time. Let's make sure we use it wisely. As the crew dispersed to their respective tasks, Ino lingered by the console, watching the swirling images with a mix of wonder and disbelief. It was a long shot, a gamble with stakes he couldn't even begin to comprehend, but it was the best shot they had. And for now, that was enough. They weren't dead yet, and in the grand scheme of things that felt like a victory. Hey, Ino, Pike called, breaking into his thoughts. If this works, remind me to never underestimate the power of a good funeral. Ino chuckled, a sound that was part relief, part exhaustion. Deal. And if we survive, drinks are on me. Survive first, Lena chimed in, her voice light but edged with determination. Then we'll worry about the drinks. Right, Ino agreed, turning his attention back to the console. One step at a time. The station continued its rhythmic hum, the dreamscape's projection a beacon of tentative peace in the dark expanse of the abyssal frontier. Ino knew there were no guarantees, no assurances of safety or survival, but for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to hope. Because if humanity had proven anything, it was their resilience, their ability to adapt and endure, even when the odds were stacked against them. They were flawed, stubborn, irreverent, and unyielding. And that, he thought with a wry smile, was something the universe would just have to get used to. The station continued its soothing hum like a drunken lullaby, and for once it wasn't an ominous sign. The crew was huddled around the Dreamscape console like a bunch of kids waiting for a magician to pull a rabbit out of a hat, or in this case, waiting to see if cosmic hooligans would stop trying to turn them into space paste. "So, what do we do now?" Tony asked, leaning back with a grimy grin that seemed permanently etched onto his face. "Sit tight and pray they don't decide to probe us," Talia snorted, her cheek still smeared with grease. "Because I'm all out of Vaseline." "Charming," Pike deadpanned, crossing his arms. "You know, you could probably make a killing in space comedy with that material." "You start a stand-up routine, Pike, and I'll be the first to heckle," Talia shot back. Lena glanced at her tablet, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "If the aliens have any sense of culture, they'll understand we're not here to pick a fight. Or they'll think we're inviting them to a barbecue," Frank muttered, clicking his tongue. "Hope they bring the coleslaw." Eno rubbed the bridge of his nose, feeling the weight of leadership pressing down like a 2-ton gorilla. "All right, people," he said, pulling himself together. "Let's not get complacent. I'm not counting chickens till they've hatched, and given our track record, they might turn out to be lizards." The team chuckled, though it was the kind of laughter that barely masked their anxiety. Eno turned back to the console, the swirling images still casting a soft glow over the cramped space. It was a strange kind of beauty, like seeing a rainbow through the bottom of a dirty glass. "How long do we keep this running?" Lena asked, fidgeting with the tablet. "Till they either reply or blow us up," Frank said with a shrug. "But seeing as we're still here, maybe they're not total assholes." "I can't believe we're banking on the goodwill of creatures we've never even seen," Pike said, shaking his head. "Talk about blind faith." "Yeah, well, sometimes blind faith is all we got," Eno replied. That and a healthy dose of stupidity. They fell into a silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Eno watched the images, his mind drifting to memories of simpler times, back when the only thing he had to worry about was whether his coffee was strong enough to wake the dead. A sudden tremor shook the station, a gentle shiver rather than the usual bone-rattling quake. The lights flickered, momentarily dimming before stabilizing again. "Looks like they're tapping back," Tony said, a note of cautious optimism creeping into his voice. "Let's hope it's Morse code for 'we're not going to kill you,'" Talia added. "Or can we borrow a cup of sugar?" Frank quipped, though his eyes were glued to the console's readout. The air felt thick with anticipation, every breath a calculated risk. Then almost imperceptibly the console's hum shifted in frequency, a subtle change that sent a ripple of unease through the room. "What the hell is it doing now?" Pike asked, his swagger momentarily forgotten. Frank frowned, fingers dancing over the keys. "Looks like feedback, but not the bad kind," he added quickly, seeing the alarm on Eno's face. "It's more like they're sending something back." "They're replying?" Lena asked, hope threading through her voice. "Seems like it," Frank replied, though his expression was one of disbelief. "If I'm reading this right, it's a sequence sort of like what we sent out." The crew exchanged glances, a mix of excitement and disbelief. It was a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, they'd made contact. "All right," Eno said, feeling a rush of adrenaline. "Let's see what they've got to say." Frank made a few adjustments and the console's screen flickered, the chaotic jumble of colors and patterns simplifying into something coherent. It was abstract yet familiar, an array of shapes and symbols that seemed to pulse with an inner light. "Alien Rorschach test," Tony murmured. "Hope we pass." "Okay, let's break this down," Eno said, leaning forward. "Pike, you're up. Put that Xenolinguist badge to use." Pike studied the screen, his brow furrowing in concentration. "These symbols, they're similar to our funeral rites. Transitions, peace, light." "So they get it?" Talia asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Either that or they're mocking us," Pike replied. "But I think they're trying to show they understand." Eno exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "All right, let's not screw this up. If they are signaling peace, we need to respond in kind." "How?" Lena asked, glancing at the console. "Same as before. Keep the broadcast going, but let's add a bit more," Eno said, thinking quickly. "Frank, can you work in a few more symbols? Brotherhood, coexistence, mutual survival." Frank nodded, already typing away. Consider it done. Just hope they don't interpret brotherhood as let's swap DNA. Just make sure it's nothing that sounds like dinner invitation, Talia added, looking amused. As Frank tweaked the sequence, Ino's mind raced. They were teetering on the edge of something monumental, first contact, a tentative bridge between species. And yet the precariousness of it all weighed heavily on him. One wrong move and they could be out of the frying pan and into the fire. A new set of images flickered to life on the console, more complex than before. They were imbued with a sense of motion, like a dance choreographed across the stars. Looks like a cosmic ballet, Lena said, her eyes wide with wonder. Let's just hope we're not stepping on their toes, Pike muttered, though there was a hint of awe in his voice. The station shuddered again, a gentle rhythm that matched the images as if the universe was holding its breath alongside them. Look at that, Talia said, pointing to a series of symbols that had emerged. They're mirroring our sequence. Ino's heart skipped a beat. They're acknowledging us. It's a gesture of understanding. Well, Frank said, leaning back with a satisfied grin. Looks like our interstellar funeral party paid off. Guess we just taught them how to party like humans, Tony chuckled. Next step, tequila shots. One step at a time, Lena cautioned, though her smile suggested she was thinking the same thing. Ino looked around at his team, his ragtag group of misfits who'd somehow managed to pull off the impossible. Despite the odds, despite the chaos that had unfolded, they'd managed to reach out and find common ground. And maybe, just maybe, they'd bought themselves a future. All right, he said, clapping his hands together, the sound sharp in the tension-filled air. Let's keep this momentum going. We need to make sure our systems are stable and the life support isn't going to drop out on us halfway through the encore. Talia nodded, already moving back to her station with Tony. On it, boss. We'll make sure this old tub keeps floating. As the crew dispersed, Ino allowed himself a moment to reflect. It was a tentative victory, but a victory nonetheless. They'd managed to send a message across the void and it had been received and reciprocated. It was more than he could have hoped for when the day began. Hey, Ino, Pike called, breaking into his thoughts. You ever think about what those aliens must be like? I mean, from their perspective. All the time, Ino replied, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Probably think we're a bunch of lunatics dancing around in the dark, hoping not to trip over our own feet. Well, they're not wrong, Pike laughed. But I guess that's part of the charm. Yeah, Ino said, nodding. Part of the charm. He turned back to the console, the images still dancing across the screen, a testament to the fragile connection they'd forged. It wasn't perfect, and it sure as hell wasn't guaranteed to hold, but it was something. And in the abyssal depths of the frontier, sometimes something was all you needed to keep going. Hey, Frank, Ino said, his tone lighter, more hopeful. Think you can whip up a playlist for our new friends? Something that'll really show them how humans do things. Frank chuckled, already plotting his selection. Sure thing, boss. Might even throw in some classics. Can't go wrong with a bit of Sinatra. Just make sure it's the kind of playlist that says we come in peace, not we've come to steal your booze, Talia interjected, her voice teasing. Ino grinned, feeling a sense of camaraderie that made the station's cold, metallic shell feel a little less isolating. They'd faced their fears, stared into the unknown, and come out the other side with their humanity intact. Not everyone could say that. As the station continued its gentle hum, the crew settled into a rhythm of cautious optimism, each task infused with a sense of purpose. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living, and they'd made a connection that transcended the void. Here's to us, Lena said, raising an imaginary glass in a mock toast. The ones who dared to dream, and who lived to tell the tale, Pike added, his own imaginary glass held high. Cheers, Ino said, nodding. Let's make sure we keep the story going. As they returned to their tasks, Ino couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. They were a motley crew, battered and bruised, but they'd stood their ground. And in a universe that often felt like it was out to get them, that was one hell of an achievement. Maybe the universe did have a sense of humor, after all. The abyssal frontier was as cheery as a funeral march on a rainy Tuesday, appropriate for a crew that had just flirted with annihilation. The research station's hum returned to its familiar, drunken lullaby, and the console lights twinkled with the smug satisfaction of technology that had narrowly avoided a meltdown. Ino Moro, dressed down in his usual drab attire, looked over his peculiar crew, who now bore expressions that ranged from relief to the "I need a drink" variety. "So," Ino began, clapping his hands together with mock enthusiasm, "let's talk about how we didn't get vaporized. Suggestions for a new protocol, anyone?" Pike snorted, leaning back in his chair. "How about don't piss off the cosmic hooligans? Could put it on a t-shirt." Lena tapped her tablet thoughtfully. "I think assume everything wants to kill you is a good starting point," she offered, smiling ruefully. "That way anything less lethal is a pleasant surprise." "Optimistic as always, Lena," Ino said, grinning dryly. "Frank, how about we start by not letting the Dreamscape console throw a tantrum again?" Frank nodded, rubbing his chin as if mining wisdom from a particularly stubborn beard. "I'll give it the old turn it off and on routine. Works every time on my toaster." Talia, hands still smeared with grease, piped up. "You know, if we ever meet these aliens, we should probably tell them we're not normally this dysfunctional. First impressions and all." "Right," Tony added with a grimy grin. "Because nothing screams competent like nearly blowing up because we forgot to unplug before messing with the wiring. And yet," Lena interjected, waving her tablet like a flag of faux triumph, "we're still here, basking in the afterglow of our near disaster. Surviving's a skill set, not a lifestyle choice," Ino said with a cynical smile. "But let's make sure next time we're a little less lucky." Pike raised an eyebrow. "Luck's just the universe saying, 'I don't hate you today.'" "Well, maybe it'll grow to tolerate us," Ino said, slapping Pike on the back. "Come on, let's put our heads together. We need a plan in case this happens again." There was a pause, a collective rustle of thoughts. The crew was good at what they did, each one uniquely talented and uniquely flawed, a cocktail of competence and chaos. They had survived so far, but the abyss had a way of testing resilience in the cruelest of ways. "All right," Ino said, dragging the room's attention back to him. "We need a protocol that doesn't rely on us guessing alien charades. Pike, you're on symbolic duty. Make sure we're not transmitting we come in pieces instead of we come in peace." Pike nodded, a cunning gleam in his eyes. "I'll make sure they get the not-so-subtle hint that we're here for a chat, not a fight. Talia, I need the station's life support systems to not have a midlife crisis every time we sneeze," Ino continued, turning to her. "Already on it," Talia replied, wiping her hands on her coveralls. "I'm thinking of installing a don't panic button." "Think you can install one in my brain too?" Tony quipped, dodging the playful jab from Talia. Ino updated his mental checklist. Survival was a team sport and they were all playing the long game. "Frank, adjust our outgoing messages. Add a bit more friendly, a bit less cryptic. And make sure we're not still broadcasting our internal monologue." Frank gave a thumbs up. "On it. I'll make sure we're saying hello and not go to hell. And Lena," Ino finally said, "keep an eye on that tablet. I want updates faster than the universe can change its mind about us." "Consider it done," Lena replied, her fingers already a blur across the screen. With everyone tasked, Ino took a moment to consider the journey so far. It was a far cry from the monotonous routine he'd once craved. But maybe the madness was part of the appeal, kept the blood pumping and the mind sharp. Nothing like dodging metaphorical bullets to remind you of the pulse in your veins. "Remember, folks," Ino said, trying to maintain the levity. "Mutual survival depends on us being a bit less of a circus act. Let's aim for Shakespearean tragedy next time, tragic but not quite fatal." "Cheers to that," Tony said, raising an imaginary glass. "Shall we toast with the last bottle of something fermented? Save it for when we're really on the brink," Ino replied with a smirk. "Might come sooner than we think if we keep this up." They laughed. a sound that was both a release and a reminder that they were still here, still breathing the recycled air of the station, still standing against the unknown. It wasn't perfection, but it was theirs. As the crew returned to their stations, Ino felt a strange sense of contentment. For all their flaws and eccentricities, they had pulled together, found a way forward, and connected with something beyond themselves. The universe was vast, indifferent, and likely to chew them up at the first opportunity, but for now they had each other. And that, Ino thought, was a hell of a lot better than nothing. Hours passed, and the station fell into a familiar rhythm. Everyone worked with a new sense of purpose, each task a step towards ensuring they wouldn't be caught off guard again. The past few days had been a ride through uncertainty, but the crew had emerged with their unity and sanity intact, more or less. The universe might be a cruel mistress, but they were getting pretty good at dancing to her tune. "Hey, Ino," Pike called from across the room where he was scrutinizing the screen with his signature swagger. "You ever wonder if we're teaching these aliens the wrong things about us?" Ino looked up from his console, eyebrow raised. "Like what? How to do the electric slide?" Pike chuckled. "More like how humanity's best asset is not knowing when to back down. Or when to quit," Talia added, not looking up from her work. "Which, let's be honest, is both a strength and a liability." "True," Ino conceded. "But it's that stubbornness that's kept us alive this long. We just need to make sure we're not being stubbornly stupid." Lena joined the discussion, her tablet tucked under her arm. "If nothing else, we've shown them we're not easily discouraged, or silenced, or killed," Frank chimed in. "And isn't that the dream? To be remembered as the annoying species that wouldn't go away." "Annoying, persistent, same difference," Ino said, shaking his head in amusement. "Let's just make sure we're persisting for the right reasons." "Then let's keep at it," Tony said, his grin as wide as ever. "We've got a universe to annoy after all." "Indeed," Ino agreed. "And maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there, we'll find a few other cosmic oddballs who appreciate our company." The thought lingered as they resumed their tasks. It was the kind of hope that kept them going, even when the odds seemed stacked against them. And in their line of work, hope was as precious as oxygen. Later, as the artificial night settled over the station, Ino took a moment to look out of the observation dome. The abyss stretched out before him, a vast expanse of darkness dotted with the occasional bioluminescent flicker. It was a universe of mystery and danger, but also of infinite possibility. His mind wandered to the Dreamscape console, now silent and cooperative, at least for the moment. It had been both a bridge and a barrier, a device that had nearly cost them everything but also forged a connection that defied understanding. As Ino stood there, contemplating the countless unknowns, he felt a presence at his side. Lena had joined him, her expression a mix of contemplation and quiet resolve. "Hey," she said softly, breaking the silence. "Hey," Ino replied, acknowledging her presence with a nod. They stood in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching the play of light and shadow across the depths. "You think we'll ever truly understand them?" Lena asked, her voice carrying the weight of unspoken questions. "Maybe," Ino answered, a note of optimism in his voice. "But I think the point is that we're trying, we're reaching out, and they're reaching back. That's a start." Lena smiled, a genuine warmth in her expression. "That's more than we had before." "Exactly," Ino agreed. "And who knows, maybe somewhere out there they're asking the same questions, wondering if we'll ever understand them." "Here's to hoping," Lena said, raising her imaginary glass once more. "To hope," Ino echoed, feeling the truth of it resonate within him. As they stood there, side by side, the station continued its steady hum, a lullaby that spoke of both rest and readiness. They had made it through the storm, and while there would be more challenges ahead, they were better prepared, fortified by their shared experiences and newfound unity. In the grand scheme of things, they were just a small crew on an isolated station, a group of misfits and survivors. But together they had faced the unknown and come out stronger for it. And for now, that was enough. The universe was vast and filled with wonders and dangers alike, but they were ready to face it, one challenge at a time. And with any luck, they'd continue to find their way, guided by the light of their own making, a crew united by their resilience and defiance, dancing to the beat of their own cosmic drum.